We find Daniel Miller at the beginning of the series working out of Panama, and he's identified the source of a leak in the CIA under the name of a character called Thomas Shaw, who is loosely based on Edward Snowden. So Daniel is tasked with going to Berlin and figuring out who that is, which means putting every single character under the microscope. So really he is the eyes and ears of the audience tracking through Berlin Station. I've worked in the genre before. About 10 years ago, I did a TV series called Spooks. It was called MI5 in the US for a British television show. So I expected myself to be rolling over bonnets of cars with guns and pulling out lots of kind of James Bond style gadgets. But actually, it feels like something's changed in that 10 years, that technology has become unreliable for the intelligence services. So it was almost like back to basics, back to old-fashioned spycraft, and a face-to-face interaction between two opponents psychoanalyzing each other and really getting under each other's skin, and not just against one's perceived enemies, but against one's perceived friends as well. So that was fascinating for me, and I think it is what makes it slightly different to the genre. It's always a physical thing, I think. I love the challenge of a very complicated psychological scene or a very emotional scene. I never find that difficult. It's usually a physical challenge. And on this one, there was a day when we were shooting flashbacks to Chechnya in the late 90s, and we were shooting close to the border of Poland. It was -14 outside, and we arrived at 4 in the morning, and I was desperate for the bathroom, and all the toilets were frozen. So I had to kind of go around the back of a shed, which was, and pee in the snow in -14, which was a little bit uncomfortable. I went in search of a truthful account of the CIA. I treated it as a job interview for the CIA. What would I do about this institution that I was going to work for? So I looked at Glenn Greenwald. I looked at some writing that he did. I looked at a novel that Bob Bayer had written. I looked at a great book called Legacy of Ashes. I forget who wrote it, but it is like the birth and history of the CIA. I also looked at a lot of fiction. I looked at Olin Stenhauer, our novelist, screenwriter. I looked at his work, and then I let the script do the work and really tried to just arm myself with as much information as possible, and then allow the character to step into the unknown. Because that's really what these guys are facing, is a sort of fumbling around in the dark, really trying to figure out what's happening. So all of the prep was up front, and then I sort of unleashed Daniel into the arena. I started following Edward Snowden on Twitter as soon as I was on Twitter and he was on Twitter, and I'm fascinated with what he has to say. I watched that great documentary about him, Citizen 4. There's a stage play that Mike Bartlett just wrote about him that's been on in London called Wild. So every bit of information about him I find fascinating, and it raises the question in myself, and I'm sure everybody, about the credibility of a whistleblower and the patriotism of a whistleblower. What he did was deemed treasonous, but at the same time it was in the interests of the citizens. So there is a conversation to be had about that, and taking part in Berlin Station helped me answer some of those questions for myself.